Hi guys, welcome back to another review video. I know it's been a while since my last one, and I've finished up a couple books, so I want to get to reviewing them as soon as possible so they're fresh in my mind. So the first one I'm going to talk about, or the one I'm going to talk about right now, is Schopenhauer biography. And I've been looking for a while for a good biography of Schopenhauer. This is by Peter Lewis, and I'm sure you find a lot of biographies on him in German, but in English it's a little bit different of a case. This isn't super long. It's, what was it, 170 or so plus appendices or indices. It was excellent length, gave a very good summary of his life and the main points of his philosophy. It helped me a lot to come to understanding both of those things. Schopenhauer is funny. I first really got introduced to him through reading Tolstoy. In Tolstoy's Confession, he cites Schopenhauer as one of the most, repeatedly refers to Schopenhauer as someone who understood, or who indicated an understanding of the way Tolstoy was experiencing life. So Schopenhauer is known as a pessimist, and it's not just a philosophical position, obviously, but it's a fruit of his own psychological makeup. So Schopenhauer's most popular for that, but the fact was his primary philosophical commitment was to epistemology. He's one of a small group of important Kantians who came after the great Immanuel Kant. You talk about Fichte and Hegel would be two other very important ones. And interpretation of Kant's philosophy would dominate German philosophy for most of the 19th century, but maybe so most of the serious academic philosophy. So, and Hegel would become the most popular of those interpreters. So compared to Hegel, Schopenhauer was virtually ignored. But he gained some attention, some popularity towards the end of his life. So I think it's important to note first that something about Kant, and then be able to contextualize Schopenhauer as a philosopher. So this day and age, in the professional or academic philosophical setting, unlike most of the philosophical history, modern philosophy is dominated by epistemology, which is philosophy dedicated to knowledge. So what is knowledge? How do we obtain knowledge? And so on. That's the most important of the branches of academic philosophy. Whereas for someone like Socrates, for instance, it was morality that was the most important. For the Christian philosophers, of course, and for the Stoics, that was, again, the case as well. And I think for Schopenhauer it was too, even though his main work, the World as Will and Representation, is mostly a work of epistemology, but as the title indicates, with reference to the will, there's a real tie-in to morality or ethics or human life or whatever you want to call it. So he makes a connection between the two. And of course, Kant made a connection between the two as well. Kant dominated and still rightly dominates modern philosophy. In my opinion, he's the greatest of all the modern philosophers. I did a review of Locke, the Cambridge Companion to Locke, I think a few months ago. And Locke was very important in turning our intellectual attention to experience, Whereas Kant and his so-called Copernican revolution turned the experience, turned towards our experience of, not of things, but of our the things as they exist for us. So Kant really paid attention to not what things are in themselves, but what our experience of them is. And he said that's the only thing that we could really know. We can never know the thing in itself, but we can pay attention to our experience of the thing in itself. And that was something very important to Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer, his transition was, I should say, Kant was interested in, and he looked at the principle that he saw that there was principles behind our experience of the world, and he looked at at generating those things, so kind of rules of experience, to tell him something about the world around us. But again, Kant would never make the mistake of saying that we can know the thing in itself. Okay, we can't know the book or the table or the chair. We can only know our experience of those things. So you can see how that's an important development from Locke. So Kant is called a transcendental idealist. So, which is to say, really to find a middle point between the transcendentalism of Plato, or idealism, and to take the lessons of Locke and the empiricists and say, yeah, that there's something definitive about things, our experience of things, and how we learn and how we know and how that regulates our lives. So in terms of this transcendental experience, or this transcendental idealism, it's the ideas, the irrevocable and the truisms that are generated from our experience of the world. So these truisms aren't about the world, they're about experiencing the world. Okay? And so as an interpreter of Kant and as a disciple of Kant, Schopenhauer looked at the role that the will plays in that. So and it turns towards, so ultimately Schopenhauer, says Lewis, and I'll have to take his word for it because I'm not an expert on Schopenhauer. Lewis says that Schopenhauer said that the thing in itself is the will. Okay, you can see how that would be a Kantian kind of conclusion, but not exactly. Okay, so if you're interested in this stuff, you're going to have to read Lewis's book yourself, or you're going to have to read Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation. I hope I've explained it adequately, but I'm not sure that I have. I'm not sure that I understand it myself. So I found the book super interesting in that it spent enough time providing the basics or the essentials of Schopenhauer's biography, but of also Schopenhauer's philosophy. And anyone can read a 170-page book pretty quickly and not be overwhelmed by it or bored by it or whatever. I found the read to be super entertaining. And really, in the end, isn't that the most important thing about a read? Is that it's interesting. You want to read it. It's pleasant, right? So I can walk away and say, yeah, this was one of the funnest books I've read in recent time. So I'll leave that with you, and hopefully someday I'll read more Schopenhauer. I've read some of his essays, which are really his most popular things, and I'd like to read The World as Will and Representation, and I'd like to read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason again. I studied it in university and wrote my undergraduate thesis on Kant, but I'm by no means an expert in Kant. Anyway, so I'll leave that with you now, and highly recommend this book if you want to start piecing together a history of philosophy for your own purposes, for your own mindset. There you go. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say about him. definitely just want to reemphasize the fact that he is interesting for me in that, again, he's one of these philosophers who spent most of his life underappreciated, like David Hume again. And Schopenhauer's fame grew from his old age to even now. But I never took a course on Schopenhauer in university, and I don't ever remember seeing one offered, which is kind of funny. I've definitely seen courses on Hegel being offered, but none on Schopenhauer. And I think in the end, and I'm not saying that Hegel isn't important to the history of philosophy and to present day philosophy, but I think Schopenhauer is very important to people too, and he appeals to people because he is sympathetic to those who suffer, or I should say his writings are comforting, maybe is the right word, or reassuring to people who suffer. And Schopenhauer is known for saying that life is basically more characterized by suffering than by pleasure, and that his idea of these things was, he was inspired, again, I said, by Kant, but also by Plato, and very importantly by Hinduism, by the Vedic writings, the Upanishads, and other very ancient Indian writings. And ultimately in the end, Schopenhauer said that the point of life is to turn from willfulness, so the will to live, and that the way to do that was to turn from willfulness to the intelligence, so enjoying ideas, enjoying beauty, and so on. I think that's kind of an interesting perspective. You can see how it is a Buddhistic idea or Hinduistic idea, that it's a surrendering of the will, a choice not to will anymore, and that all suffering comes through the will, of course, and that's what the Buddha said, right? Anyway, so I think it's really interesting, and it was a great read, so I highly recommend it. So happy Halloween, everybody, and have a great day.